Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Mike Chace Ortiz. I'm with Thomson Reuters, and welcome to this presentation this lunchtime. Thank you again for joining me. I'm responsible for product strategy for our generics products, and it's a real pleasure to be able to present to you here today on the topic of building and protecting strong product portfolios. Something that's very much a fundamental piece of what we help many hundreds of companies do around the world, both generic companies, formulation companies, and API manufacturers. In terms of my agenda today, what I wanted to cover with you is really a brief overview of current market environment globally, the major trends affecting businesses in the US and Europe, and then examine in more detail how innovators think about the life cycle of their products, and similarly how generics think about those same products too. What we'll find is that the kinds of intelligence and information that are required to succeed in both kinds of businesses are remarkably similar. First, to briefly introduce my business, Thomson Reuters, to you. We have more than 20 years of experience working to help innovators, generics, and API manufacturers with business-critical information. The core of our business has been and remains API manufacturing intelligence, which we gather and validate through a worldwide network of industry sources. So we do what is called primary intelligence world. It's quite unique within this particular industry. And so we talk on a daily basis with many hundreds of people in factories where, of course, API is being manufactured, but also to people like agents, traders, consultants, anyone really that can help us understand what's happening in today's API manufacturing industry. And the reason that we do this, of course, is that access to available sources at the right level of quality of active ingredients is very much drives dynamics for competition in the generic industry, and also allows innovators, should they wish to, see the earliest signs of developing generic competition for their branded products. You can find users of our Newport databases and consulting services in many business functions, from product planning through competitive intelligence and into API sourcing, of course. And today we serve something close to 400 customers around the world that operate in well over 80 countries today. We do all of this work from our offices in Portland, Maine, which is close to Boston on the east coast of the USA. So turning briefly to the industry, global spending is expected to increase in the next few years to more than $1.25 trillion. However, the majority of this growth in terms of revenue is likely to come from the emerging markets. Developed country spend is remaining very much flat or in the low single digits. As treatments become more specialized, we anticipate the largest component of spending to be in specialized therapy areas such as cancer and in many of the so-called Western lifestyle diseases such as diabetes. It's also important to note that today biologics not only make up the majority of blockbuster branded sales around the world, but are also now approaching around a third of all activity in R&D pipelines. US, of course, is still, by some degree, getting smaller every year, still the largest pharma market in the world, and certainly exhibits many of the kinds of developed market growth aspects that I mentioned earlier. Market share of generic drugs certainly continues to rise in volume terms, although not in dollar terms. And one of the biggest challenges facing particularly generic manufacturers and marketers today is that the FDA still has a very considerable backlog of about 2,500 ANDA applications that at the moment are taking around about 36 months to be approved. And if you've been seeing the industry news lately and seeing what the commissioner of the FDA and the head of the Office of Generic Drugs has been saying, they don't expect that 36-month time frame to be getting smaller over the next 2 to 3 years. So that backlog will remain to be a serious issue for anyone wanting to compete in the US market. And now that we are sort of post the much talked about patent cliff, there are certainly fewer opportunities than before. And many payers are sourcing products on a global basis, demanding ever cheaper prices, but without sacrificing quality and reliability of supply, of course. And there are a number of particular regulatory changes that I'll say a little bit more about in the moment that are also very much affecting this industry. Europe, despite having some similarities, is a little bit different from the US. And here, particularly as far as R&D and branded drugs go, health technology assessment organizations such as NICE in the UK really having a very profound impact on research and development and brand drugs, as these organizations and payers in particular force innovators to think much more about the value and benefit of their drugs as opposed to the old measures really of safety and efficacy. So that's obviously an impact on brand drugs today that may well turn into a pressure on generic companies in the future. The wholesale and distribution system in Europe is also rapidly consolidating and becoming very much like it is in the US, where about 3 companies have together more than 90% of the wholesale and distribution market. Consolidation over the last few years here in Europe has resulted in 5 companies having over 50% of the wholesale and distribution market here. And there are many countries also that are continuing to mandate prescribing by INN rather than brand names. So in many of the smaller European countries, we're seeing that change. And that also has an impact in increasing the volume shares of generic drugs quite markedly. In the US, probably the most important change in the regulations has been the impact of track and trace, where it's really designed to improve the security of the supply chain and will have a major impact on all pharmaceutical companies. Indeed, we're hearing of companies today that are treating this change in regulations very much from an enterprise standpoint. To me, as an ex-consultant, it's rather like the order-to-cash implementations with SAP that were done in the late 1990s, where the whole order-to-cash process was re-engineered and software such as SAP was used to support those changes. So many companies now are completely re-engineering their processes, often from API supply, maybe even from intermediate supply, right the way through to delivery of their product to the patient, supporting those changes in process with enterprise-wide software as well. So that clearly is going to be a major impact that we can see in the industry, and of course becomes an entry-level requirement now for doing business and marketing products in the US. Perhaps even more obvious to many of those in our industry than track and trace user fees for generic products through the implementation of the Generic Drug User Fee Act, or GDUFA, as some people call it, is really having a change on industry that already operates to very thin margins, and again increases pressure in terms of costs to compete in the US market. So user fees for both API manufacturers and finished dose marketers now can easily exceed $250,000 for a new product if plants need to be inspected along with those new launches. And even now with drug master file filings costing more than $26,000 each, these kinds of additional costs, again, for companies operating on very thin profit margins, will certainly mean that only those companies with real serious intentions of competing in the US market will be making these kinds of regulatory filings in the future. Meanwhile, in Europe, the major regulatory change here is the implementation of the Falsified Medicines Directive. This new rule is really aimed at ensuring, again, that all imported active ingredients are from manufacturers that can at least demonstrate that they've met GMP requirements, at least equivalent to that of here in Europe. And like the US's track and trace regulations that I reviewed earlier, there's also a strong element in the Falsified Medicines Directive that's focused again on supply chain security. So once again, cost implications of implementing things like barcoding, serialization, and other anti-tampering measures can be quite significant for businesses. And there at the bottom of the slide, you can see, I think this is from the European Generics Association, the EGA, who completed a study recently with the introduction of this new rule. You can see there that even for small manufacturers of generics with relatively modest market shares, the costs of implementing these new rules could be well over 50 million euros over the space of 5 years. So quite significant costs again to manufacture and market products for here in the European market. Although on a more positive note, perhaps, while it's certainly true to say that R&D pipelines and new launches aren't what they used to be in terms of number and frequency that we've enjoyed over the last few years, there's still a reasonably steady stream of new innovative product approvals in the US. Here you can see in gray new ANDA applications, and in yellow below that BLA applications for biologic drugs over the last few years. And you can see that we're still on pace for well over 100 launches expected for the next year. And again, as you might expect with R&D pipelines very much well stocked with biologic drugs, applications for BLAs are also slowly rising. And of course, many of you probably recently saw that we have our first 2 abbreviated BLA applications in the US now as biosimilars slowly becoming a reality in the US. Looking forwards, however, it's certainly true to say that we are living very much in a post-patent cliff world. And not only are there less opportunities for companies to chase in terms of new product launches, also the total sales potential of those new opportunities is on the decline too. And unique to the US is also this process that we have. Most people know it by its regulatory name, the Paragraph 4 patent challenge process. It's a part legal, part regulatory process that allows generic companies to challenge the patents of innovators and their innovative drugs. And being first to file one of these challenges and winning the subsequent litigation can bring a very lucrative 180 days of exclusivity, where just the brand drug and a single innovator's drug, or sometimes shared exclusivity, where there are 2 or 3 generic drugs competing exclusively with the brand drug for a period of 6 months. On the other hand, if you fail to win that litigation and perhaps you launch your product at risk, there can be very serious implications in terms of being liable for damages to the innovator. But you can see from the chart here that patent challenges still remain very much a central strategy for generic companies from all countries in terms of being successful in the US market. But of course, Paragraph 4 process is limited to NDA applications and small molecule approvals. But of course, as many of you know, biologic drugs, in many cases, the patents that are protecting those products are also now rapidly approaching expiration. Here you can see some of the top 10 products that will lose patent protection over the next 5 years. So the smallest of these drugs sells well over $5 billion worldwide in total. So let's take a look now at both brand companies, innovators, and generics, and how they can build strong and successful products, and the kind of information and intelligence that are required to carry out those tasks successfully over the lifetime of a drug. In our experience of talking to brand managers over the years and senior executive at innovators, they generally tend to view the development life cycle in 3 stages. Stage 1, of course, begins with the drug discovery process and ends with new approval by regulatory agencies and the launch of a new brand name drug. Because of attrition, it's a chance of usually 1 in 10,000 to get a drug successfully from laboratory to the market. This generally costs around $900 million of investment and takes somewhere around 8 to 12 years in many cases. During stage 2, of course, the innovator companies try to maximize their revenues and protect that investment that they've made during the research and development phases by product promotion, label expansion, and other product improvements. They may also, of course, apply for market exclusivity to extend the protection of those drugs. And during this period also, they may do things such as trial the drug for new indications, perhaps try new formulations, again, to expand the label and increase the lifetime of the drug. Patent expiration really marks the beginning of stage 3, and almost immediately in many markets now will open the way for generic versions of the product to be launched, usually, of course, costing a fraction of the price of the brand drug. And in many markets now, particularly in the US, for example, we see 8 to 10 companies, generic companies often launching at the actual day of patent expiration. So very competitive markets for generics throughout the world. And here again, though, innovator companies may look at many different ways of offsetting the losses to generic companies. They may out-license their products. They may look at, again, other formulations that they can switch patients to, such as sustained release or controlled release formulations, or they may pursue things such as authorized generics. Okay, of course, ensuring maximum return on that R&D investment can be done throughout the life cycle, and there are plenty of different options available to innovator companies to do this. And certainly during the first and second stages, building a strong label, as I mentioned before, now that's very much focused on being able to demonstrate value and cost effectiveness, much more so now than safety and efficacy. So building a strong label in the early stages is vital to success on the market. And then as stage 2 proceeds, really understanding the strength and direction of generic competition becomes much more important. Generic companies generally tend to target products very early in the life cycle, in many cases much earlier than people in many brand positions tend to appreciate. And as the product matures and reaches close to loss of exclusivity, many progressive innovators are looking at ways to reduce the cost of goods so that they can compete more successfully on a price basis and cost basis with generics as expiration nears. And even post-exclusivity, again, brands can continue to thrive as authorized generics, or either selling or licensing those products to other countries, maybe building out branded generics in other markets, particularly emerging markets, has been a very successful strategy for many innovator companies. So in terms of the different information resources that are required on a global basis that need to be in the hands of branded portfolio teams, certainly in the early phases, as Thomson Reuters has very much pioneered, the earliest and most reliable indications of upcoming generic competition is the active ingredient development activity. So the number of companies, the stage of manufacturing, and the ability of those companies to bring generic active ingredients to regulated markets is a big indicator of future generic competitiveness for a branded product. Certainly as the product matures, And teams would be much more interested in patenting activity by generic companies, most of which will have to be challenged locally. And it's important to have particularly the kind of depth of coverage of information on your competitors' products too. There have been plenty of cases over the years where early availability of a generic has disrupted the market for other branded drugs. So there's certainly an opportunity again that can be created for many brand companies by looking at the impact of generic competition on your competitors' products. Again, as loss of exclusivity approaches and deal-making activity increases, you need to understand API production as well. If you're looking to reduce cost of goods, API being a very significant component of that cost. And other types of data are required around portfolios of other companies, so trying to identify perhaps where your branded product might fit a gap in a company in a new market, and again allow you to increase the value and lifetime of your product in different markets. So let's look now at that same life cycle view, but this time through the lens of a generic company. As I mentioned earlier, most sophisticated generic companies today target products in many cases certainly 10 to 12 years into the future. So products that companies are looking at today, maybe even here at this event, are things that products that they intend to launch many years into the future. And really the most critical aspect of that work at this time is identifying a viable source of the active ingredient at the right level of quality and supply for your target markets. Later, of course, partners are assembled to make the finished product, conduct bioequivalence studies, and particularly, of course, in the US market, launching patent challenges is a very important part of conducting business there. And again, though, even post-launch of the generic drug, which really consists in many cases of making sure that you push the sufficient amounts of product at the right price into the right distribution channels, even subsequent to that, in many markets, generic companies can also do things post-launch to prolong the life of their generic products. Again, markets need to be expanded. Perhaps your generic product in a major market can also be a successful branded generic in smaller markets around the world. And again, there's also an opportunity for even generic companies to continue to reduce the cost of goods of their products by looking at switching API supplies to a lower cost source. And a number of companies too have pursued these so-called super generics or generics plus type strategies, where they look for maybe innovative combinations of older drugs as a way of, again, extending the lifetime and revenue of their products. So again, information required for generics is a little bit different, but again has a lot of similarities with the kinds of information that are required to defend branded portfolios. In the early phase of work, it's important to understand generic launch timing, or constraint dates as we call them in our products. Really have to be understood in all the markets of interest, as must, of course, patents, exclusivities, market potential, and, of course, that all-important source of API that hopefully you can reach earlier than your competition, secure on an exclusive basis, and hopefully also, therefore, lock out your competition from that one source of supply. And whilst you're formulating your products, you still clearly, of course, still need to pay attention to what competitors are doing. And after launch, too, there's certainly the case for strong partnering data, understanding deals, and opportunities to open new markets with existing products. So as you can see, even though we have very different viewpoints and aims and timing throughout the product lifecycle between innovators and generics, there's a surprising amount of commonality between the types of information that are required to execute those strategies and make sound business decisions. These include patents, manufacturing information and intelligence, sales and market data, regulatory information, corporate data, and also deal making. And for most companies, of course, these are all acquired very much on a global scale for all countries of interest and markets that need to be developed strategically. This is very much the conclusion that drove us to develop the Newport products that are used quite widely now in both industries for the kinds of purposes that I've reviewed earlier. So although there's common data requirements, it's really the ability to integrate and then search all of this information that really releases the value to our customers. Here you can see the kind of complex product-based searches that you're able to conduct in the Newport systems, test out very complex business strategies in a matter of minutes, really, what would otherwise take many hours or days, maybe even weeks of effort, even with today's internet sources to be able to replicate. So not surprisingly, Newport Solutions can do this kind of work also not just on the product side, but can also conduct these kinds of searches on the company side. So doing the kinds of, or executing the kinds of searches that I mentioned earlier to spot gaps in companies' portfolios, maybe by product or by certain markets where they may not have coverage in a certain therapeutic area. Again, these are all examples of the kinds of searches that can be done very quickly and conveniently using the Thomson Reuters Newport products. So thank you for your time and attention today. I hope that was a useful and interesting, productive look at how to protect and build strong product portfolios. We're right across the way here at stand just across the way, so if you'd like to come and see more of the products, I'd be delighted to show you, and if we have time for a few questions, I'd be happy to answer any. Thank you.